The morning air was thick with humidity as the young Marine adjusted his uniform and tried to focus on the drills, but every movement felt heavier than the last. He could feel the sweat running down his back and the sting of blisters forming on his hands, as if his body were rebelling against the relentless routine. The base seemed alive with tension, the hum of engines and the distant shouts of commanding officers blending into a constant background roar that gnawed at his nerves. He glanced around at his fellow recruits, some with faces pale and drawn, others with eyes hard and unwavering, yet all seemed to carry the same invisible weight of anticipation. The new civilian instructor arrived quietly, without fanfare. She walked across the training yard with a measured step, her posture flawless, and her gaze sharp and calculating. The Marine could not take his eyes off her despite himself. There was something about the way she carried herself, a mixture of authority and mystery, that demanded attention without a word. She did not smile, did not wave, simply observed and commanded the space around her, as if the very ground acknowledged her presence. The Marine felt a flicker of unease, mixed with curiosity, as he watched her inspect the drills, her eyes lingering on mistakes and correcting them with a precision that seemed almost surgical. During one of the exercises, the Marine was paired with a fellow recruit tasked with carrying out a complex maneuver. They stumbled over one another, each step amplifying the frustration building inside him. The instructor moved among the recruits, silently noting every error. Her gaze eventually settled on him, piercing and unrelenting, as though she could see every insecurity he tried to hide behind his rigid posture. He felt the heat rise in his chest, and the tension in his muscles coiled tighter with each command yelled by the drill sergeant. A mistake on his part sent the drill spiraling out of control, and before he could think, he snapped. In a moment of fury and desperation, he reached out and yanked her hair, pulling her back violently enough to shock everyone around. The yard went silent for a heartbeat as every eye turned toward the unfolding scene. The Marine felt a rush of adrenaline followed by instant regret as the instructor did not react with fear or pain. Instead, she spun around, her expression unreadable, her eyes cold and calculating, as if measuring the weight of his soul. Whispers started immediately among the recruits, some speculating about the woman who could not possibly be affected by such a crude attack. Others stared in awe at her unshaken demeanor. The drill sergeant barked commands, but even his voice seemed diminished under the presence of the instructor, who now stood inches from the Marine, her posture unyielding and her gaze locked on him like steel. The Marine could not speak, could not explain his actions, as a wave of dread washed over him. He tried to read her expression, searching for anger or punishment, but found only a quiet intensity that made his stomach churn. He could feel every eye on him, and he realized with a sinking feeling that he had crossed a line. He did not understand. He wanted to apologize, to explain, but the words stuck in his throat like lead, and fear gripped him tighter than any physical restraint. Later that evening, he sat alone in the barracks, replaying the moment over and over in his head. Each movement, each reaction, each detail of the instructor's unflinching composure haunted him. He could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on him, even in the solitude of his small cot. The other recruits avoided him, the whispers still lingering in the air, and he could not escape the sense that something monumental had shifted the ground beneath him. He remembered the rumors circulating in hushed tones. Since the instructor had arrived, stories of covert operations and missions. No one dared to discuss openly tales of courage and danger that belonged in legends rather than the confines of a naval base, yet he had dismissed them as exaggerations until now, when the reality of her presence struck him with terrifying clarity. He realized he had confronted someone whose life had been forged in a crucible of secrecy and skill far beyond his comprehension. As days passed, the Marine struggled to regain composure, his confidence shattered and replaced by a gnawing uncertainty. He watched her movements and interactions with others, noting the subtle ways she commanded respect without raising her voice. Each correction, Each demonstration was a lesson in precision and control that made him painfully aware of his own clumsiness and impulsiveness. He felt trapped in a world that demanded excellence he had yet to earn, and every glance from her reminded him of his misstep one afternoon during a tactical exercise. Caught sight of her reviewing strategy with other instructors. She spoke quietly and with authority, her gestures minimal. But every word carrying weight. The Marine felt a flicker of something between fear and fascination. He could not distinguish whether it was admiration or the terror of being under scrutiny by someone who had mastered every skill he was struggling to understand. He practiced the maneuvers obsessively, trying to anticipate her expectations, each movement an attempt to prove himself worthy of her attention. In the quiet moments of the evening, he sat by the edge of the training field alone with only the distant hum of activity for company. He replayed the incident over and over in his mind, wondering what she thought, what she felt, and whether he would ever be able to earn redemption. Her presence had become a shadow over him, a constant reminder that actions had consequences far beyond what he had imagined. He felt both drawn to her and intimidated by the sheer force of her being, as if every step he took was under invisible surveillance. Then came the day when the drill sergeant announced a new challenge, a high-stakes exercise requiring trust and cooperation among the recruits. The Marine knew he could not fail. Not again. He was paired with other recruits but found himself acutely aware of the instructor observing their every move. He could feel her gaze on him as they moved through the course, each obstacle a test of his skill and restraint. He faltered once, nearly losing his footing, and the instructor's quiet correction cut through his panic like a blade, reminding him that mistakes could not be hidden and weakness would not be tolerated. That's the exercise concluded. She approached him and spoke in a low voice. Calm yet firm, her words were measured, almost cryptic, but carried a weight that made him realize she knew more than he could comprehend. She did not scold him or berate him. Instead, she left him with a sense of foreboding and curiosity, as though she had glimpsed the potential within him but was not yet ready to reveal the full measure of her knowledge or power. The Marine returned to his quarters that night, exhausted and unsettled. He understood that the world he had entered was far more complex than he had imagined, that discipline and strength were only part of the equation, and that wisdom and control were weapons he had yet to acquire. He stared at the ceiling and wondered how one person could carry such power with such calm, and whether he could ever rise to meet the expectations of someone who had already conquered challenges he could barely fathom. In somewhere deep in the shadows of the naval base, the instructor observed from a distance. Her expression was unreadable as she considered the Marine, not with anger but with a calculated assessment of his potential and the trials that awaited him in a world where every misstep could be fatal. Marine woke before dawn, the chill of the early morning air cutting through his uniform. He felt the weight of the previous days pressing on his shoulders, each memory of the instructor lingering like a shadow over every thought. He dressed quickly, moving with a nervous energy that made his movements sharp and deliberate. He knew today would be different, the quiet sense of anticipation and fear coursing through him as he stepped onto the training field where the fog clung to the ground like a living thing. The instructor appeared, as always, without warning. Her presence, silent yet commanding, she walked among the recruits with the ease of someone who had faced impossible odds and emerged unbroken. Her gaze found him and held it for a heartbeat that stretched long enough to make him feel exposed, as if every secret flaw and fear had been laid bare. She spoke only when necessary, her voice cutting through the murmur of the recruits, guiding them with precision and control. New exercise was announced, a tactical simulation designed to test judgment, courage, and trust. The recruits were divided into teams, each tasked with navigating a series of complex obstacles. Under extreme pressure, the Marine found himself on a team with two other strangers whose competence he could not yet gauge, but whose lives would depend on his decisions as much as his own would depend on theirs. He swallowed hard, feeling the knot of anxiety tighten in his chest. The simulation began, The team moved cautiously, the obstacles. Demanding coordination and quick thinking, the Marine's mind raced with every step. He calculated angles, anticipated threats, and struggled to keep his fear from overwhelming his actions. He caught glimpses of the instructor, observing from a distance, her expression unreadable, yet somehow conveying expectation. He knew she was testing him, measuring not just skill, but character and the weight of that realization made his heart beat drum painfully in his ears. One point his partner faltered, and the team teetered on the edge of failure. The Marine acted instinctively, pulling them back from a near disaster, his hands steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. The instructor stepped closer silently, watching every move, and he felt the gaze that had once terrified him now stir a strange mixture of respect and apprehension within his chest. He realized that the test was never just physical. It was about mastery of self-control and the ability to rise when fear threatened to overwhelm our success. Past each challenge more demanding than the last each time he stumbled, he felt the instructor's eyes cut into him, as if reminding him that failure carried consequences that went far beyond simple reprimand. He began to understand the magnitude of her presence, the years of training and experience hidden behind calm eyes, the quiet command of authority that required no words to assert its weight. He could feel a subtle shift within himself, a burgeoning awareness that the path to earning respect was fraught with danger and self-discovery. Then came the final stage, a simulated capture requiring stealth strategy and split-second decisions. The Marine moved with cautious precision, relying on every skill he had learned, the mistakes of the past acting as a guide to navigate the present. His heart pounded as he crept through the shadows, each step calculated yet instinctive. The fog thickened around him, obscuring vision and amplifying tension until every sound seemed like a threat, every movement a potential disaster. He reached the target point only to find an unexpected obstacle blocking the way. It was a test of judgment, requiring him to decide quickly whether to risk exposure or retreat. He hesitated for a heartbeat, calculating the odds, and then acted, choosing a path that demanded courage and trust in his own abilities. His pulse raced as he maneuvered through the final obstacle, emerging unscathed on the other side. The instructor appeared immediately after her footsteps. Silent yet resolute, she looked at him closely, her eyes searching for any trace of hesitation or weakness. He felt a flood of relief mingled with apprehension as she approached and spoke in a calm, deliberate tone, revealing for the first time the truth of her identity. She led the Navy SEALs, and her presence at the base had been no coincidence. She had been sent to observe and evaluate the potential of the recruits. Under her watch, the Marine staggered back slightly, the weight of revelation crashing down on him. He had faced the unknown, the fear and the judgment of a woman who had lived through more than he could imagine, and yet he had survived and proved himself capable in ways he had not thought possible. The instructor's expression softened subtly, acknowledging the growth he had achieved through struggle, discipline, and determination. But there was no time for celebration. The revelation brought new stakes. The Marine now understood that the world he had entered was far larger, more dangerous, and more complex than he had realized. He would be called upon to face challenges that demanded not just strength and courage, but intelligence and resilience beyond anything he had yet encountered. The SEALs operated in shadows where mistakes were fatal and success required absolute precision and trust. Over the following days, the instructor took a personal interest in his development, guiding him through rigorous training sessions, missions, and evaluations. Each task pushed him to the edge, physically, mentally, and emotionally, forcing him to confront fears he had buried deep and weaknesses he had tried to ignore. She tested his limits, her methods exacting yet fair, and he began to see the method behind her seemingly harsh approach. Every movement, every command, every observation was designed to forge him into someone who could survive in a world where failure could mean death. The Marine adapted slowly, his body learning to move with stealth, his mind honing strategy and foresight, his instincts sharpening under pressure. He began to anticipate the instructor's methods, not through familiarity, but through understanding of discipline and precision. The respect he had once feared now transformed into motivation to push further, to become more than he had ever imagined. He could one night during a simulation involving a mock extraction, he found himself separated from the team. Navigating treacherous terrain alone, his mind raced with calculations and contingency plans. Each step demanding careful thought and decisive action. He encountered unexpected obstacles, each one more dangerous than the last, and he realized that his survival depended on everything he had learned from the instructor, from the drills, from the mistakes he had made, and the lessons he had absorbed through observation and experience. At the culmination of the exercise, he emerged victorious but exhausted, each muscle aching, each breath ragged. He knew that this was only the beginning, that the true test of his abilities lay ahead in missions and trials that would challenge not just his body, but his mind and character. The instructor approached once more, her expression inscrutable, yet carrying a faint trace of approval. She extended a hand, signaling the completion of the exercise, but also the continuation of the journey that had only just begun. The Marine grasped her hand firmly, understanding in that instant the magnitude of what he had achieved and the enormity of what awaited him. He had confronted fear-faced judgment and survived, emerging not just as a recruit, but as someone capable of rising to meet challenges beyond his comprehension. He realized that the instructor had never been an adversary, but a guide, a test, and a force shaping him into something stronger, faster and wiser. As the sun rose over the base, the Marine stood alongside the instructor, watching the first light touch the horizon. He felt a sense of purpose and clarity that had been absent before the shadows of doubt, fear, and uncertainty replaced by determination and awareness. He understood that the world he had entered demanded excellence, courage, and resilience, and that he was now ready to face it under the guidance of someone who had mastered it completely. The instructor turned and walked away silently, leaving the Marine to reflect on the transformation that had taken place. He knew that every decision, every action, every moment of struggle had led to this point, and that the path ahead was fraught with danger, but also with opportunity. The Marine felt a quiet resolve settling over him, understanding that he had earned a place not just as a recruit, but as someone capable of walking in the shadows of the elite, a step closer to the world of the Navy SEALs and the life he had only begun to glimpse. Sand in the distance, the instructor watched the horizon. To her thoughts, unreadable, but her presence, a constant reminder that true strength was forged in adversity, discipline, and the courage to face the unknown without hesitation or fear.